So today we're going to talk about skepticism, and skepticism is interesting in a way. I think the best way for us to talk about it is to look at the topic from the standpoint of happiness. Happiness. So the last time we met, we talked about Nietzsche and his critique of Plato and Aristotle. And remember that thing I told you that philosophy or philosophers that put forward an idea of truth based on this abstract place, this abstract idea, actually produce followers that are sick, or that are kind of like, not sick in a literal sense, but their souls are sick. Why are their souls sick? Why would you be ill at ease if your head is always in the clouds? It's an interesting question if you think about it. What do you guys think? Is there any validity to what he has to say there in your own personal experience?
I think yes, because like if your head's always in the clouds, that means you're not focusing on the reality that you're living in.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like that would give you a very bad way of life, because you
Yeah.
kind of have to make what's in your reality, like you have to use that to your benefit rather than dreaming of some other reality.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's like the best summary of Nietzsche's argument I could put together. I think that's exactly right. Excellent, yes.
I agree, because if your head is always in the clouds, then you just don't know what's going on around you. You're not keeping up with everything.
Yeah.
There's knowledge.
Yes.
There's no contributing of the society that's around you, and you just have no idea of what's happening.
Yes.
It's happening for you. Instead of
Yes. Exactly. However, let's play devil's advocate the other way, and let us remember what Socrates actually did. And what he actually did was try to, let us say, reorient the way that people see the world. And what he's presenting is something which is unknown. I've discovered something that you don't know. It's not of this world exactly. Kind of has a correspondence to this world. So the difference there is that yes, you live in the world, you live in reality, you face things as they are, your head's not in the clouds. Okay, fine, that gives you good practical advantages as a person, no doubt. But to Socrates' credit, I don't know. I don't know that he necessarily would have a problem with that. Maybe his problem is bigger or different. So that's something for us to think about. But let's go back to this question of sickness, because the person we're going to talk about today is actually a doctor, a Roman figure who is one of the most important figures of skepticism, which is a school of philosophy. And his name is Sextus Empiricus. Kind of a silly name. I have little children, so I have like potty humor like in my my little girl would laugh if it said Sextus Empiricus. Actually, she wouldn't laugh, she's too young, she doesn't know what that is. So anyways, he was a doctor, and the theme of sickness is super important for him, because for him, and I wonder if you agree, we often think of the health of the body just as the body. In other words, we split the mind from the body. And there's, in our modern world, a lot of divisions. We go to certain doctors for certain bodily regions. And of course, back then, as you probably could imagine, a doctor was a holistic doctor, right? I know Tori's interested in alchemy. Doctors were not only making interventions within medical sciences, but they're making interventions within science writ large. They may be making interventions where they were worldly, right? A doctor was interested in human knowledge in a worldly conception. Whereas today, most of you, let's say if anyone's interested in going to medical school, you're going to have to touch some worldly aspect of medical knowledge. But as you know, you ultimately will have to decide upon something fairly specific, specialized. And the same is true with most areas of knowledge today. Philosophy is an interesting discourse because one way to think about what philosophy is to think about it as posing questions within all different areas of knowledge. And by posing questions, you can think about this in the basic form of Socrates' examination. I mean, after all, wasn't that what Socrates did? He just walked around the city and he went to the people who thought that they knew the most about whatever topic, and he examined them and found out that, in fact, what they were talking about is not necessarily universal truth. It's actually particular to their discourse, to their field, to their specialization. So the philosopher is interested in this category, right? Oh, now I know this. Oh, this is the cause. You see? This is the cause. Stupid thing. The philosopher is interested in the category of what we can call universal truth. So let's bracket that category, and we have some knowledge of Aristotle, some knowledge of Plato, and some knowledge of Socrates. We're moving on from them. We're moving on. However, one way to go back and reference our boys in the past is to say, in general, that they are concerned with universal truth. Plato, the forms; Aristotle, the idea of the essence. They have different strategies to arrive at it, but in general, they're interested in ascertaining universal truth. Point number one. Point number two, that universal truth transcends my own subjective opinion of it. It's really real. It's really real, right? So, reality is sort of knowable at this level of universal truth. Now, for Plato, the forms are something which, as we know, is sort of approximated through mathematics ultimately, right? And you know the hierarchy that we presented with the simile of the divided line. But the point is that we rational beings can access this indisputable absolute realm of truth. Okay. So that's what philosophy and philosophers are interested in. Okay. However, there becomes a problem because it's very hard to shrug off the fact that every time I think about something, and I try to reach for this universal part of what it is that I'm thinking about, whether that be an object in the world like my phone, or whether that be the concept of justice, or whether that be the student justice in the back, whatever it may be, if I wish to arrive at what Aristotle calls explanatory knowledge, I have to go through certain procedures. Now, the people that we're talking about today, the skeptics, they make an interesting kink in the hose. Like everything's kind of flowing. But is it? And they make a claim that my relative position, like my own position within whatever it is I'm examining, will always make a problem of my effort to reach this universal part of the truth, number one. So they make several claims. So I'm already jumping into the skepticism stuff. I'm going to give you my little lecture, then we'll meet in our groups. Sound like a plan?
Okay.
Yeah, good? Thank you. Okay, so what are the presuppositions of skepticism? Let's just lay it out. Now, by the way, Sextus Empiricus, man, clear writer. Clear like crystal, like just accessible and good, in my opinion. So anyone who reads him should not feel sick. To go back to our metaphor of sickness. Because if I, as a philosopher, am interested in bringing you to this other region of thought, this higher region of thought, you struggle to get there. You struggle to get there. You don't understand what I'm saying. It's never quite adequate, right? And you sort of are climbing a ladder. Well, Sextus Empiricus says, see the ladder? Forget the ladder. We don't need it. So it's very practical stuff. So, okay. And he kind of comes in the history of philosophy at the end point where skepticism had built its best fortifications of its system, its best mode of critique of other schools of philosophy. And it had gained a pretty big following as well. Okay. So let me start by asking you a question. What does it mean to doubt something? Like, just in a basic sense, like when you are doubting something in your life, what are you actually doing? Like,
You don't believe in it.
okay, so you introduce a category of belief. Is that what you're doing, though? Because belief is something. Belief, let's throw that on the board. Okay, so it may be belief. It may be that you don't believe it, but it may be something else.
So I mean, like, if somebody told me something like, "Oh, I can throw a football over a mountain," I'd be like, "I doubt it."
Yeah, but a doubt is, it's not that you don't believe it, it's just you kind of agree, but you're not fully there.
Okay. You kind of agree, you're not fully there, but why?
Well, I mean, if, for his football example, if I say I doubt it, that doesn't mean I'm 100% saying that it's not possible. I'm just saying,
Because it's not
It's a-
possible. Nobody gonna throw a football over a mountain.
never know.
So then-
Things happen.
Okay, that's good. So then, yes.
I think when you doubt something, you question the validity of its truth.
Okay.
Like, it's not you don't believe it. It's
Yeah. What else? Good. Yeah, you question the validity. Validity is one way to say it, but there's probably other ways to say it. Because it's possibility. Based on what then? What are you then exercising if you're questioning its validity or its possibility?
you want to know if you should believe or not.
Yeah, you're doing an investigation.
Yeah.
You are kind of like a mini scientist. You are examining it, right? So, what else are you doing when you are doubting something?
Being uncertain.
Certainty. Thank you. Yes, you are uncertain. Okay, good. I think certain and certainty is the key concept here. Any other ideas of what you are doing when you're doubting? Because what you are doing when you're doubting is not like a passive thing. Really, what you're doing when you're doubting is you are trying to arrive with absolute certainty about something, and then the doubt comes with your questioning about the absolute certainty of it. if you had absolute certainty of it, then how would you characterize it? You characterize it as having,
Certainty.
yeah, certainty. Exactly. So the distinction that determines doubt is this. It's not this. I mean, what is belief? If I have a belief in something, is that the same thing as having a certainty of it? No. In fact, have you ever noticed in your life that beliefs often are proven wrong in small ways? Maybe the color of some object in your backyard. For the longest time, you thought it was blue. You walked up closer to it and you noticed that in fact it's green. But belief is in a certain sense kind of passive because it doesn't matter if it's blue or green. It doesn't matter. But you weren't, because why? Because you weren't searching for certainty of it, right? You see the distinction there? So what I'm trying to say to you is that when you use the method of doubt into truth of something, you are searching for certainty. Okay, we can then say, we want to ascertain the truth of the thing. All right. So, incidentally, this is not what skepticism is seeking to do. This is why skepticism is so flippin' cool. Skepticism is not saying, I am a philosopher and I want to know the truth of this thing. It's not saying that. It's saying something different. And what it is saying, I mean, it's pretty funny because oftentimes in colloquial, like everyday conversations, you say, I'm a bit skeptical. I'm a bit skeptical about that thing, right? So usually when we say we are skeptical, it's basically the same as this. We're a bit doubtful, right? Pretty much, yeah? Sextus Empiricus says skepticism aims not to find the truth of the thing through certainty. Rather, it aims for what he calls the suspension of judgment. It aims for the suspension of judgment. In other words, it aims to enter a space of knowledge about what it is you're considering that has revealed a contradiction. That has revealed a contradiction. Okay? And once that contradiction is revealed, the skeptic can set the question of certainty or uncertainty down. It doesn't care. It doesn't matter about that. They set it down, and this is the nice part. This is where happiness comes into play. This is the nice part. They enter into a space of tranquility. You can think about it like kind of like, you remember when we talked about Aristotle's ethics. Everything is like the archer who's aiming for the mark. And the mark is the good, right? And what's the good? The good for Aristotle is found through a kind of balancing of virtuous action, right? So you have to have action which is in comportment with a higher virtue, and that action has to be directed at something good in itself. So it has to be directed at an end which is not limited, but is actually universal. Is universal. This is why you don't become happy if you only are interested in the acquisition of material goods. You don't become happy because the acquisition of material goods is always a particular, it's not an end. So for Aristotle, happiness is a bit more complex. It's a bit more complex. Like it requires a lot. Remember, young people are not yet happy. They have to work on it before they can become happy. They have to cultivate their character, right? So the more good actions you do, the better your character gets, the stronger you get in doing those actions. Then the more you become happy. So happiness is like a residue effect off of your actions, yeah? For the skeptics, happiness does not require all of that mumbo jumbo. It doesn't require all of that. In fact, I just got 8,000 steps. Boom. In fact, it requires getting into this space. Now, we're going to get in our small groups and talk about this, but I don't want to share my own opinion about this, but it's interesting because each time the possibility of an absolute truth presents itself, the strategy of the skeptic is to deny that absoluteness, is to deny this part, to deny it, and to enter into this, into suspension of judgment. Now, the question is, why? Why is it not good to look at the world this way? Okay. Here, we have to note a few general presuppositions about skepticism, like their worldview, the way they see the world, okay? Everything is transient. Everything is in flux. It's kind of like the view that I told you about of Heraclitus, which is that everything in the material world in nature is constantly undergoing change. As such, it's really hard to step outside of that change and see something which is constant. So therefore, we can't really say with certainty what is not change, because everything is composed of constant change. So they basically hold this view. Number 3, no beliefs. We hold no beliefs. We hold no beliefs. We'll come back to that in a moment. Concurrent to that, we hold no doubts. We also hold no doubts. Ah, yes. See, his eyes go like that. But now you know why. Because doubt is about ascertaining certainty. We're not concerned with ascertaining certainty. You understand? These guys are kind of crazy, right? Right? You see what I'm saying? We accept only one cause. Remember, Aristotle had 4 causes, right? Remember the four causes? Efficient, material, final, formal. Try to remember them because drum roll, midterm. No, but the only one cause is this. Like the desire to enter a space of tranquility. Let's call it desire for tranquility. Okay? So they are making a claim here. Sextus Empiricus is making a claim here about, in the same way, by the way, that Aristotle makes a claim in the opening of the Metaphysics, which I've mentioned to this class several times, which is that humans have a built-in desire to do what?
Know the truth.
Yes, exactly. So Aristotle says we have a built-in desire to get beyond this. We have a built-in desire to get beyond doubt. Yeah? To arrive at certainty equals truth, right? Sextus Empiricus says, no. Actually, truth doesn't matter for the human being. It doesn't matter. Not like that. Not in this structure. Forget this. Forget this. It's something different. And it's something different because the world is constantly changing, but it's also composed, and this is a nice, interesting point they make, ideas that compose certainty or uncertainty are very intense on both sides. They're very intense. Ideas are intense. So what's the best example of intense ideas? I'll give you the best example you could ever ask for. What you say is good and what I say is bad. Or what you say is good and what I say is good. Right? Now I'm not saying good as in like that sweet potato tastes good. I'm saying good as in how we as Americans ought to do gun reform. Huh? The debate on gun reform is deeply intense. No? If anything, it's deeply intense. Yeah. And so, skepticism would wade into this debate, and they would actually say something perhaps that's unpleasing to you. Which is that for questions of reality, we seek tranquility. For questions of action, we seek moderation. So, on what we are to do about gun reform, we seek a moderation. Why do we seek a moderation? Well, opinions and so-called truth that's behind opinions, but it's only philosophers that claim that opinions have truths. The rest of us just say we have opinions, are also super intense. So therefore, in all cases, we must find the moderate one. Same goes with questions of reality. What is reality? All that means is investigations into the real nature of things. Another word for that might be science, right? So the distinction between a question of action versus a question of reality would be, not to get too fancy, but kind of like metaphysics versus ethics. We already know something about metaphysics from Aristotle. Try to find the primary essence of the thing. We know something about ethics also from Aristotle, which is interested in what? Coming up with some theory about how we act in the world. properly, right? So, tranquility and moderation. Now, you may think to yourself, this is kind of a cop-out, or boring, or kind of repetitive. And in some ways it is. I mean, if you think about it, you're trying to tell me that in every question of reality, you want me to fall back into the suspension of my judgment about it so that I can feel good on the inside? To play devil's advocate, doesn't that kind of sound like it's a little narcissistic maybe? Like too me-centered? You see my point? If it's always about deriving tranquility for me, what about things outside of me? You see, because skepticism is very important in the history of philosophy for this very reason, okay? And we're going to track this as we progress in our class, which is, you see, for Aristotle, the question of knowledge was outside of the subject, it's outside of the self. It's really, the metaphysics are the nature of reality. It doesn't necessarily matter that my mind is involved with the ascertainment. It matters early on, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, you see. The skeptics say, one way to understand them is that it always matters. My relative position always colors any question of my investigation into the truth of something. So I never leave the situation. I'm always there. And by me, like my mind, the way I perceive it, is always there. And therefore, I create the biggest hurdle to truth itself. If that makes sense. My investigation into it muddies the water each time. So, questions about this stuff here? Interesting, right? So, one nice example is can a parrot that talks also convert to a religion? If converting to a religion means that you say a phrase, right? Which is true, right? It's true. For some religions, you say a phrase. The parrot can say the phrase. Tell me logically why the parrot saying that phrase is not a part of the religion now. Why?
Because the parrot will repeat whatever you say.
No, what if you train the parrot and your way? It does it on its own. Well, why would that not qualify as the parrot now being a part of this new religion? It's a hypothetical religion.
Because the parrot doesn't really know any better.
How do you know? It knows how to speak. It knows how to use language.
What's a parrot?
Well, but you're claiming some knowledge about the parrot. What is the knowledge you have of the parrot that's different?
Well, parrots, you can train them to do that.
Well,
Like,
wait a
say
second.
whatever.
You're going to be exclusive. You're going to exclude animals from your religion? Why?
That's not what I'm saying.
It sounds like that's what he's saying. That's what he's saying, right? We just created a new religion and it's humans only. Well, what is it about the parrot that makes the parrot unable to really be in the religion? What the heck does that mean? What is reason? It can speak. No, I told you, I trained it. It chose to say these words. I mean, it knew them, but weren't you trained to speak?
A parrot doesn't have a
Weren't you trained to speak?
strong enough brain to
Yes, I
comprehend
also
the
learned on
religion.
my own.
So, and the parrot learned through what? It didn't learn on its own? You see, making all these claims about the parrot possessing something, but you know nothing about what that is. What do you want to say? You want to say soul? You want to say it doesn't have a soul? Then you're going to be in real trouble with the skeptics. Yes?
I mean, well, every religion comes with like a set of morals and a set of codes you're supposed to follow. So if the parrot's just reciting a phrase and not doing that, technically it's not fully practicing the religion.
Maybe. But the parrot has already proven that it can learn a language, and maybe if it can learn a language, maybe it can also prostrate, for example. No? Why not?
It's not understanding.
Or maybe it's not prostration, maybe it's meditation. When it sleeps, like that qualifies as its practice. Can somebody tell me a universal reason why the parrot should be excluded from our religion? Because you can try to go down the road of saying that it has reason or a soul, but it's going to be tough for you to describe and define what the heck that is. Yes, Dorothy?
Didn't either Aristotle or Plato say that only humans have like
Yes, they did.
connection to the form?
Yes. So you can go down that road. You can try to defend it on their language, on their terms. They would say that, you're right. They would say that the animal doesn't possess a soul, but then they would define what a soul is. And then we could decide if it's a valid definition. You see, for next time we meet, and this weekend, we're going to read what Sextus Empiricus has to say about soul, about whether there is God, about all of these important, bigger questions. And what we're going to find is something very interesting. Very interesting. Which is, let me erase this. We're just going to say this and then we'll break into our groups. So, you have a breakdown of appearance, versus objects of thought of that appearance, right? Now, we know that appearance is always fleeting and constantly in change and flux. We know that when we see an object in the world, whether it be the coffee cup, the phone, the banana, or another human being, what do? What do? We categorize it, right? We try to make some sense of it, right? In some cases it's pleasing to us, in other cases neutral, in other cases not pleasing, right? In all cases we know that it is relative to us, right? It's relative to us. Like, I don't have to share my thoughts with you. Do I? I mean, I do now, unfortunately, but most of the time we don't, right? We stay definitely in the cocoon of our own heads, almost all the time, right? Then you can ask that stupid childish question, can you ever really know someone? You know, when you fall in love in high school, yes, but will I ever really know you? And then it's like this beautiful, tragic thing, and then that becomes the definition of your love, the lack of knowledge. You know what I'm saying?
No idea.
You know, oh, come on. Who wants to fight me on this? Come on. People say it all the time. Is that what you said?
I've never heard.
Yes.
Wait, can
You never had an innocent love where you said, like, you get in a fight and you sort of say, I don't know if I'm ever going to fully know you.
I've heard like
No.
it's not you, it's me.
Yeah.
You hear that a lot.
What do you mean fully
Okay, I'll rephrase it. It's common in relationships. Maybe I threw you off because I gave you the jitters saying high school love, and many of you are not over your high school loves. But that's on you, not on me, okay? Okay, that's on you. I'm not over my high school love either, man. I got dumped on Valentine's Day when I was a junior. I did. But she was older than me and a cheerleader, so I felt like I was a big stud. And I'm giving too much information, but anyways, it was good for the soul. It was good for the ego, you know?
Yeah.
Ego check. Anyways, it is common for us to reach a point where you have a kind of impasse, where basically my subjective position is such that, like, I'm never really going to be able to know or be in your shoes completely. And when you're in an intimate relationship, you kind of accept that reality, oftentimes. You also accept that there's parts of the other person that you're never going to fully know. Okay. All right, we're good. I'm glad we got that out of the way. Okay, so the skeptics are going to fall along the line of only trusting in the appearance of the thing. Because their enemies are these people who are walking around trying to make a claim that there is another dimension, a higher dimension that things correspond to, mainly the forms. And as you read, Sextus Empiricus, in a pretty even-handed and maybe even vulgar fashion, deconstructs Plato's idea that there is this other part that corresponds, this other form area. And in other words, they recognize that there is a relative and a kind of, what does he call it? Like a kind of, there is the way that I see the banana, then there is the way that the banana is talked about. The way the thing is understood. Okay? So the way the thing is understood is like the conventions that we have of it, the things that we say we know about the thing. For the skeptics, the interesting thing, then, okay, so let's add three categories. Then you have the universal dimension of the thing. So you have its appearance, you have its appearance as it pertains to you, how you see it. Then you have the knowledge that other people impute onto it. Everybody knows this about this type of banana. It's from this country, and they spray the insecticides on it, and it tastes this certain way, and it's an expectation. Then there is the category of the philosopher, which is that, in fact, the banana is an imitation of an ideal form of a banana. It's not exactly perfect, but the idea of the banana exists somewhere in the upper regions of our rational minds. So, here's the thing. What the skeptics basically wish to do is shatter all of those. Because they know that none of them are going to deliver this. One, they're not going to deliver an absolute certainty. Two, they're not going to deliver us to the goal, which is the tranquility that comes from the suspension of judgment on the object itself. So, this is getting a bit complex. Don't worry. What really matters, therefore, what is therefore privileged, is how things appear prima facie, or, so to speak, immediately. So, in that sense, I think a good skeptic would be someone who, like, trusts what they see. Like, the appearance of something doesn't deceive often. It can, but often it doesn't. So, anyways, this is what I wish to say about skepticism. This gives you a little sketch of the philosophy. with our remaining time, I was thinking it might be interesting for you all to convene and talk about one specific thing, which is, when was the last time you witnessed someone, or yourself, it could be yourself, who was being dogmatic about something? Dogmatic. There's a new term I've introduced here. You see, because let's define it real quick before we talk about it. Plato, what does Sextus call Plato? Yes.
Dogmatic?
Yeah, he calls him a dogmatist. Yeah. So, why? Well, he's already agreed that this third dimension behind all objects and all things exists, and he's already created, like, so to speak, like a framework to understand the world. So he's a dogmatist, is someone who comes with a pre-formatted certainty and applies it. So I want you to talk amongst your group of an example of dogmatism that you've witnessed or that you've been a part of recently. And I want you to tell your friends in your group, like, what your thoughts about it were. Was it good? Was it bad? Maybe actually don't only think about this in the negative sense. Don't only think about dogmatism in the negative sense, because maybe there's good dogmatism. What might be a good example of dogmatism?
Religion.
Sure, maybe, yeah. Or even ask yourself this. Why is it that our culture, in many senses, privileges the dogmatist? Think of all the presidential elections recently in your lifetime. You know, you got to be strong in your convictions. You got to remain consistent. You should not be a waffler. Yeah? Waffle, like waffle. You know, waffle. Waffle, right? John Kerry was a waffle, like you waffled. So dogmatism is not a negative. I mean, a skeptic, a true skeptic like this, tranquility, suspension of belief, there's no way they're going to get elected. You see what I'm saying? Why? Because they don't see knowledge like this. Our world sees knowledge like this. Right? We see everything through certainty or uncertainty lens. But the skeptic asks the following question. What if that's making us sick? What if that's making us sick? And I want you to think about that, actually. I want you to think about whether dogmatism makes us sick. I don't mean sick like the flu. I mean sick like uneasy inside of ourselves. Right? Right? You know the distinction I'm making, right?
Like, why does it create doubt?
Why does... No, good question. No. Why does our world, our society in general, approach truth in this way of having to ascertain the certainty of it? Why? Why are we so concerned about that? You see, the skeptic says that obsession that we have takes us away from tranquility. Tranquility is therefore you could say like their version of salvation. To be like redeemed as a human being, to be happy. You have to, like, they're philosophers precisely because they're saying the way that we understand what's true and what's not true is all wrong, and it needs to be based on this. Cool? So, talk about dogmatism in your group, and maybe we'll have some time to share some examples. I don't know. Go ahead.
Or
4's here.